Welcome, everyone. It is now 1 o'clock Eastern Time, and we are ready to begin our webinar. We're so excited to have you join us today for Education Leads Home webinar, The Power of Relationship, How Mentorship Can Support Chronically Absent Homeless Students. Just a couple housekeeping notes. This webinar is obviously for you, our participants. If you look at the panel on the side of your screen, you should see a couple small white triangles, one of which is next to the word questions. That's our questions pane. You're welcome to enter a question in the questions pane at any time. We'll be fielding questions at the very end of the webinar. However, if for some reason we don't get to all of the questions by 2:15, do not fear. We save all of the questions. I will forward them to our co-presenters, and they will respond to them in written form as appropriate. And I'll assemble a clean Q&A copy that will then distribute to all participants of the webinar and also make available on our website for everyone to take a look at later. Also on our website will be an archive of this webinar and all of the associated materials. So another panel that you'll see, subfield that you'll see on the panel, is the handouts panel. And in there we have a PDF of this actual PowerPoint, as well as two other handouts that one of our co-presenters, the lovely Sarah Miller, will explain during her presentation. So a little bit about our campaign, Education Leads Home, which is still relatively new, just over a year old. The only national campaign dedicated to improving education for students experiencing homelessness. And we have three very specific goals related to enrollment, participation, and attainment and achievement. The first is that young children will participate in quality early childhood programs at the same rate as their housed peers by the year 2026. The second, that high school students will reach a 90% graduation rate by 2030. And finally, that post-secondary students will reach a 60% post-secondary attainment rate by 2034. And obviously, a huge component of educational success is attendance, just making it through the doors in the first place, which is what brings us to our topic for today. Here you can see a list of our partner organizations, the Institute for Children's Poverty and Homelessness, Schoolhouse Connection, Civic, formerly Civic Enterprises, America's Promise Alliance, and Education Council. And we welcome you to take a look at our respective websites to learn more about what we each do and how we contribute to the mission behind the campaign. Our presenters, not necessarily in this order, are Rebecca Camejo, a Schoolhouse Connection Youth Scholar from the University of Miami. Rebecca is in the throes of her second week ever at college, so we're so grateful to her for joining us today. Also, Sarah Miller, McKinney Vento Liaison from Spokane Public Schools in Spokane, Washington. And finally, Joseph Angren, Training Director and National Trainer with Check and Connect out of the University of Minnesota in Minneapolis. I am Katie Brown. I am the Program Manager for the Education Leads Home campaign, and I work for Schoolhouse Connection. And again, we're so excited to have you all with us today. So today's agenda, we are going to start. I'll start with a very cursory overview of chronic absenteeism and its effects on students. A lot of this information is going to be covered by Sarah, Joe, and Rebecca, so I'll really leave it to the experts. Then we'll segue to Joe, who will explain the Check and Connect model. And Rebecca will share her story next. Rebecca actually has to run to class at 2 o'clock, so we are taking as much of her expertise and knowledge as we can but before she has to go off and do the most important job. This means that she won't be present for the Q&A, but we definitely invite you to ask her questions in the Q&A box. She has said that she is more than happy to answer questions via email after the fact. And Sarah Miller will close us out with talking about Spokane Public Schools' experience implementing Check and Connect in their school district, and then we'll segue into questions. So very briefly, what is chronic absenteeism? There's actually a little bit of not necessarily tension, but some differences across the United States in how it is how it is defined, but the majority, at least 27 states, describe chronic absenteeism as those students who miss 10% or more of days enrolled, including both excused and unexcused absences. And most of you joining this webinar, have experiences in some form or fashion as educators and advocates. But why does it matter in the first place? The effects on students are significant and profound. Students who exhibit chronic absenteeism are less likely to meet grade level proficiency standards. They're more likely to drop out of school, and absences, even in the early grades, which many people deem insignificant because they're just young kids and all they do is play, it actually has a very long and lasting impact. In terms of the population that we'll be focusing on today, how is chronic absenteeism a warning sign? In our work, we note that it very frequently is an indicator of underlying challenges that may signal the experience of homelessness. In terms of national chronic absenteeism data, the most recent reports that we have indicate that almost 8 million students are chronically absent from schools in the 2015 to 2016 school year. And of those 8 million students, it's not surprising that economically disadvantaged students are more likely to be chronically absent than the overall student population. But additional studies indicate that even that over and above economic disadvantage, students experiencing homelessness are chronically absent at rates even higher than their housed and low-income peers, which is why what we are going to be learning today is so important, how we can support and enable the empowerment of this group of young people. With that, I will go ahead and segue to Joseph Engren. Joe, take it away.
Great. Thank you, Katie. Welcome, everyone. I appreciate you spending some time during a busy time of year. And so we're going to talk a little bit about Check and Connect, a model intervention, as you can see there. As Katie said, I'm the training director and a national trainer with Check and Connect. I've been with the program now 3.5 years. My background is I was a teacher for many, many years and then worked in professional development here in the Twin Cities in Minnesota. So we'll just kind of jump in here. And again, as Katie said, we'll entertain questions at the end. And then, of course, you can always reach out to me later. So for those of you that don't know a lot about Check and Connect, we are a structured mentoring intervention. And by structured, we mean that we have core components and essential elements that have to be in place, but we're not scripted. And that structure can be flexible, can be flexibly implemented from site to site. We are a mentoring program. It's an intervention based on mentors having relationship based on trust with a student, with a mentee, and then of course we are an intervention. We're not designed for all students because not all students need this, and so we'll talk a little bit about who might need and benefit from Check and Connect. Our bigger goal is really to promote student engagement. Of course, we want students to finish school, but we believe that that comes about by making sure that students are engaged when they're at school and when they are learning. Slide, please. So one of the questions that we often get when we talk about Check and Connect is how does it fit in with existing initiatives? And so if you recognize the pyramid here, whether you're multi-tiered systems of support, PBIS, RTI, the alphabet soup we have going on here, Check and Connect most often, when talked about in terms of those initiatives, is often considered either a Tier 2 or a Tier 3 intervention. So it's used and is implemented with students who are not being successful through the universals or the Tier 1 interventions. Where a site situates Check and Connect Tier 2 or Tier 3 is really a decision at the site level. Check and Connect has features of both of those levels in that we work with and identify a group of students, which would be targeted, but the intervention is actually with one-on-one with a mentor and a student. So it has kind of features of both. Next slide. So one of our kind of claims to fame, if you will, and how we and why we show up and are asked to talk to districts and to community agencies is that we are an evidence-based intervention. And for those of you familiar with the What Works Clearinghouse, a division of the Department of Education, they, in a sense, vet all the educational research out there and hold it up to the gold standards. And twice now, in using studies from 2006 and 2015, we're the only dropout prevention intervention to show positive effects for staying in school. And so many states, when they are encouraging school districts, of course, to implement Check and Connect or to implement an intervention, there have to be some results behind it. There has to be some evidence. And so this is why we often show up on the list, is that we're backed by the research. So some things that we've learned in almost 30 years that Check and Connect has been around is that there really is power and value in the intervention, and that this intervention is really personalized. Again, we've got core components and essential elements, but when you're actually working with the student, it's very individualized and personalized. Of course, relationships are essential. We know that in life in general, but especially in the intervention here, that relationship between the mentor and the student, that connection, that consistent person in their life, is a huge protective factor for students in keeping them in school. We also know that at the site level, the need for a coordinator, someone to keep Check and Connect, what we call the Check and Connect champion, so that mentors are supported and the program is implemented with fidelity. And then finally, we look at dimensions of engagement. In particular, we look at and use observable signs of student engagement, but we also look at those things that are inside students. For example, how they think about school and how they feel about school. Slide. So briefly, here are the core components. The mentor, which is the foundation for the intervention. The mentor builds that trusting relationship, works with the student, we like to say, for a commitment of at least 2 years, and we'll talk a little bit about why that's so important. And then mentors use what we call persistence plus, hanging in there with students in spite of decisions that might be made by students, in spite of behaviors, in spite of sometimes students pushing them away. A mentor hangs in there and persists. The check component is a focus on, The check component is a focus on systematically collecting data around attendance, as Katie mentioned earlier, around behavior, and then around course performance. Those are the three areas that we primarily focus on. And we focus on those 3 areas because, first of all, schools usually have that data around attendance, behavior, and course performance. That data is amenable to change via the mentor, and that data is also highly predictive of if students are going to stay engaged and be in school. The third component is connect, and that's where the mentor and the student actually meet and discuss their data that's been collected. They do some problem solving. The mentor is all about helping the student navigate and build capacity in the student. And then finally, we have family engagement. And this is, again, kind of what makes us unique in that we really are trying to invite and inform and include the family to the best of their ability, to the degree they want to be included in the education of their children. Very, very briefly, because we do come from a Check and Connect as really two sources. One was the Minneapolis Public Schools back in the late 1980s, early 1990s, and then it comes from the University of Minnesota. And so we present or bring to it the foundational theories that are woven throughout. And the most important one for our purposes today is resilience theory. And that's the idea that it's based on the idea that children are resilient. But what we know about resilience in students is that without support from an adult, from a significant adult, the bounce back is never up to where the student was. So there is a bounce, there is a resilience, but without support from a mentor or an adult, a caring adult, they don't bounce back or even bounce. What we'd ultimately want is them to bounce farther. So that's where the mentor comes in, and the mentor becomes then the person who ensures that resilience by focusing on the protective factors that are present in the child and the student, the child, the family, and the school, and using those to mitigate or reduce the risk factors. So then we have systems theories, just meaning that when we work with students, we have to remember they're part of a school system, a family system, and a community system. We can't work in a silo. Cognitive behavioral theory, in that we believe and we work with students to change how they think and feel about school, to develop efficacy in them. And then finally, we work on developing in students intrinsic motivation. I can do the work, which is about competence. I want to do the work at school because it's tied to goals that I have. And finally, that need to belong. I want to be at school because I feel like I belong here. It's a place for me. Slide. So I mentioned earlier multiple dimensions of engagement. And so this is a graph that we use in training that talks about, when we talk about engagement in Check and Connect, we really talk about areas that we can see that are observable and areas that are internal, that are inside students. And so while the observable engagement often gives us a good idea in terms of how kids can appear to be engaged, we really focus on how kids think, which is cognitive, how they think about school, and how they feel about school. We're pretty sure through the research that internal engagement has to be in place first before you'll start seeing observable engagement. So for example, if I don't think that school is a place for me, if my schooling is not tied to goals that I have for after I'm done with high school, the chances of me completing my homework or participating in class or coming to school or even participating in extracurricular activities, the chances of that happening are going to be pretty slim if I don't feel like or think about school being part of my plan or my goals in life. And so mentors spend, through that relationship, getting to know how students think and feel about school and addressing those issues. And then the idea is, once those are addressed and worked through, then the observable engagement starts to come through. So when we go to sites and we are talking about preparing them for implementation, these are just some of the things that we walk through and sites think about. And so we pay attention, first of all, to the indicators of disengagement. We spend some time talking about the alterable things in engagement, which would be attendance and behavior and course performance, among other things. And then we also talk about those risk factors, those status risk factors, sometimes called also early warning signs, that we need to know, but we really can't as mentors do anything about. And so within that group, that status risk early warning, I would put homelessness. We need to know when students are homeless, but from a mentoring point of view, I can't change that. I have to acknowledge it and work with it, but I can't change it. And so we spend some time talking about what can we change and what should we be paying attention to. And as Katie said, that absenteeism, attending school is huge. The literature also talks about, when you miss 2 days of school, the day back from school is really considered a lost day also, because you're catching up on what's going on. Also, in preparing for implementation, we talk about criteria for selecting students, because most schools, sadly, have many more students that need a mentor than the capacity they have to fill that. And so we start talking about some criteria. So what kind of criteria will you look at around attendance? Students missing, for example, between 10% and 20%. Students that maybe have 2 or more behavior incidences. Students that are having 2 or 3 Ds or Fs are just some examples to kind of narrow the pool for students to be in Check and Connect. Then we spend some time talking about selecting mentors, and every site is a little bit different in terms of the model that they're going to choose. The 3 main models are using existing staff as a mentor. A second model is using what we call dedicated staff as mentors, meaning that their primary job in the school is to mentor students. So they might work with quite a few students if they're working 25 or 30 hours a week. And then some sites use community volunteers as their models. A few sites use combinations, but it really depends on kind of your particular site and what fits for you. We also encourage sites to organize resources for mentors. Mentors don't have to know the answers and be all and end all for everyone, but mentors need to know if a student they're working with has academic needs or social needs or even physical needs, such as housing or clothing or food. What can the school provide for them? And then what's available in the community. So the mentor serves as a resource broker. And then we also spend some time talking about how to introduce Check and Connect to students and to staff and to families, what language to use, how to explain it, so that those groups of people know about it and then want to participate. Slide. So one of the first questions, especially when we work in schools and we're doing mentor training, is the mentors want to know, well, how much time does this require and what exactly am I doing in a week? And so this graphic helps explain that. And so I'll start actually in the middle where you see the boxes. And there are 4 tasks that mentors do every week with students. There's some communication with parents every week, and what that looks like is dependent on what the parent prefers and the mentor can provide. The mentor reviews that student data on attendance, behavior, and course performance every week, and we review it every week so that we can notice patterns, but that we can also intervene quickly. There's some communication with that child's teachers, with the student's teachers, to check in on their progress. And then finally, the biggest chunk of time usually is the mentor meeting with the student. On average, as you can see at the bottom of the screen, all 4 of those tasks take about an hour in total, okay? And it's important to note that hour is not a 60-minute solid block of time. It's 10 or 15 minutes throughout a week, is how most mentors manage that. We then look at the graph to kind of see the difference between elementary and secondary. And it's important to note that many people think of Check and Connect as an intervention at the secondary level, which is where it started. But we've had many, many sites, an increasing number of elementary sites, realizing that early intervention is the key, and that many of the early warning signs and the risk factors that we see in secondary students are present before our kids even start schools. And so that's why we're looking at elementary. Many sites are implementing at the elementary. A couple of slight differences here. You can see in the graph that there's more connect meeting time with a secondary student than the elementary. That's the dark blue color here. And simply put, that's because secondary kids have more complicated lives. They're in a lot more classes. They might be having a job. They might be having relationships. They just need some help navigating school. And developmentally, they can sit and talk with a mentor for a longer period of time than an elementary student. Another significant difference is that mentors would spend more time with an elementary parent at the elementary level than they would with a secondary parent. There's still time spent, but that support is different. And of course, the difference at the elementary level parent is that I've always said it's the rare 7-year-old that makes the decision to stay home from school on their own. There's usually a parent component, and so you're going to spend a lot more time as a mentor at the elementary level talking and working with parents than you would at the secondary level. So that usually gives mentors an idea about what might a week look like. Next slide. The next step of implementation is that we talk about how to kind of collect that data around attendance and behavior and course performance. And so depending on the site, they might use a monitoring form, which we have examples. Some sites like to create their own. Some sites make it a hybrid that they can use. We also have a Check and Connect app. It's a web-based application accessed through a browser. That site, it's about 1.5 years old. So some sites have chosen to use that. And then they also try to figure out, okay, how are we going to access the data around attendance, behavior, and course performance? How will mentors be able to do that in an efficient process so that they can make decisions? We also talk about personalizing the intervention. Again, that's Connect. And then within Check and Connect, there are 2 levels of the intervention. There's basic, that I'll talk about in a little bit, and then there's intensive, so knowing that. And then finally, we talk about partnering with families, some core strategies that we have on how to invite, inform, and include families in the educational process. Slide. Here's just an example of a monitoring form that we offer. This is, again, it's an Excel spreadsheet. When you are part of our trainings, you get an editable form of this. And again, it has attendance and behavior. This is for a month's worth of data. So there's a lot going on here. Many, many sites use a modification of this or use the app, which has certainly a different look to it. Next slide. And so about the app, just a couple of a little bit of background. Again, it replaces that paper pencil data form, which many sites appreciate. It helps monitor the fidelity of the implementation in terms of the mentors, making sure that mentors are kind of doing those basic tasks every week. It does collect data at the site level to determine the impact of the intervention. And then ultimately, it does show data in a more engaging visual presentation than that spreadsheet that you saw before. And I think we've got a couple examples coming up here on the next slide, perhaps. So this is a screenshot from a page that the mentor would use to enter absence data. So just some drop-down menus here. This is for a week's worth of data. This is showing attendance and behavior. So very, very easy to do. Automatic. There's an autofill button that can populate it. The next page shows you how that data looks in presentation form. And so this is 3 months of attendance data, and we use what's called a heat map. And so the code to the heat map for attendance is the darker the color, the more severe the infraction. So the very darkest color would be an all-day unexcused absence, and then the very lightest color would be tardies. And so if you look at this example, you can certainly see some patterns here in that October stands out, and then within the month of October, there are some more patterns. So again, a much more visual representation that a mentor could share with a student or share with a parent or share with a teacher of that student to kind of get an idea about what are some patterns and how might we intervene. Next slide. Here's behavior. Again, 3 months of behavior. And so if I was a mentor and I'm looking at this, I'm seeing that this student had some attendance issues from the slide before, but really has not been, does not have any behavior concerns at this time. And then the next slide, I believe, shows course performance. And so based on, again, a month's worth of data, the courses are listed to the left. And right now with 6 courses, that's a pretty busy graph going on there. And so one of the features that you can do in the app is you can deselect courses. So if I just wanted to highlight U.S. History and Algebra 2, I can deselect the other 4 and those pop up. So again, just another way to look at the data, a more engaging visual presentation. Next slide. So I mentioned the basic intervention that all mentors use, and so all students in Check and Connect receive this every week with the mentor. So there's a sharing of the data, of the check data, the attendance, behavior, course performance. The mentor provides feedback on the data, so letting students know this is the level of where you are, this is where we expect you to be, and together we're going to come up with a plan to get you from one level to the other. So that happens every week. Sporadically, the mentor may also be discussing school, perhaps on a monthly basis, or facilitating problem solving as needed. But the first 2 bullets happen every week, and that way we keep on top of the data, we keep kind of working the plan, so to speak, and intervening as quickly as possible. Next slide. Again, we use an intensive intervention within Check and Connect, and we use intensive when we see spikes in data. When we look at that month's worth of data and we decide and we notice, wow, all of a sudden absences have increased or the grades have dropped. And some features of them are that they are customized and very individualized to the student. They address issues that might be pushing students or pulling students out of school. That's their person and environment fit. And the intervention, when it's at the intensive level, might involve either direct service or referral to another professional, either inside or outside school. Next slide. And within the app, again, here's an example of to kind of monitor for fidelity. You can see on the left the 4 components of the basic intervention, and then there's a place to note conversations to families, to facilitate tutoring if that was one of the interventions, and then you can add. So all of it can, in a sense, be housed within the app in terms of monitoring the level of the intervention. Next slide. Here are some of the strategies that we focus on with mentors and with schools. We ask them when they think about these strategies, when you think about these, what's going well, and then how might you improve in any one of these areas. And so the 4 main areas are enhancing that homeschool communication. We always talk about schools do a really good job of sending information out. How might you encourage or support communication back to you. We encourage or suggest home visits as one strategy. It's not for everyone, but we know that home visits can be very, very powerful. How you respond to parents' questions or concerns is something else to think about. And then how might you encourage the home to support the learning that's happening? Next slide. And then finally, in training, we talk about monitoring the environments that the student is in. So we're asking the student in Check and Connect to change their thinking and behavior, but we want the school and the home and the community to support what we're doing. And so we make sure as mentors we're monitoring those to make sure those environments support. We talk about the need for, again, that Check and Connect champion, to the coordinator at the site level. And then we do spend some time talking about how to monitor the intervention in terms of fidelity and, in a sense, when to start looking for outcomes, positive outcomes. Here's a little bit on that person-environment fit again, just making sure asking the student to change and making sure that those three environments support what we're doing. Next slide. We talk about the importance of monitoring with any program, but really to stay on top and to ensure the fidelity of implementation. Monitoring helps us and provides us with information on how to improve the intervention or the program. It often helps us identify areas that might need some professional development for mentors and some adaptations. And then, of course, we're looking to demonstrate the impact of the program. Fine. We do have some tools that are part of our training that we encourage sites to use. We have a readiness checklist when sites are just at the beginning of thinking about implementing Check and Connect or considering it. And so the readiness tool is based on the NERN hexagon. And so it addresses the need of the intervention, the fit, and the capacity to implement. We have a mentor practice profile that we've developed that describes the mentor practice and the levels of performance to support the mentors. We have a fidelity survey that we ask coordinators to implement, kind of a dipstick on mentors periodically to kind of make sure everything's on track. We have a self-assessment that's actually in our manual that monitors implementation of the core components. And then we do have a student engagement interest that was developed at about the same time as Check and Connect, but it is a self-administered survey that focuses on the student's cognitive and affective engagement, those things that we can't see, but that we know drive student engagement. Fine. Here's an example of the mentor practice profile. And again, these are available through our training when people train with us. Again, another example of the fidelity survey. Very, very simple. We designed something that could be administered. It's 5 questions. It's a check-in, again, to kind of catch when things are going right, but certainly then to intervene when things are not, when things have kind of fallen off the track, so to speak. If somebody, for example, isn't collecting data every week, I would want to know that very, very quickly so I could support that person. Next slide. This is the student engagement instrument. We're currently in the process of developing an online version. If you go to our website, you can still get the paper pencil version. All you have to do is register for it. And then you're able to get that. But also know that probably within the next 6 months or so, the version that will be available is the online version, and there will be a fee associated with that. But it's some pretty great information on, again, that unobservable, that cognitive and affective dimension of engagement. For sites in general, Here are some lessons we've learned to pay attention to. Like any initiative in a school, there needs to be administrator support. There doesn't necessarily have to be administrator direct involvement, but administrator support is critical for the intervention to thrive. Data collection is a challenge in some sites in terms of where do you find the attendance, the behavior, and the course performance data. Time, of course, how to find time to train sites, mentors, meetings, weekly meetings, monthly meetings, mentor professional development. Many sites struggle with changes in school personnel. That can affect the implementation of the program. Of course, competing initiatives and other interventions. And Check and Connect doesn't necessarily replace other interventions or other mentoring programs, but there's something else on the plate. And then engaging families remains a challenge. Families are very, very busy, and so we talk quite a bit about how can we meet their needs, leading the lives they're living right now. And then this is just a cover shot of our Check and Connect manual. It's always been available online through purchase for many, many years, written with the idea that you can buy the manual and you can implement the program. Some sites do that, but not everyone does. Here's an example. The graphics didn't translate on this, but this kind of tells you what some of our training options are in terms of what kind of training you're looking for. And every site is different. This also does not have we have online training now for that preparation and implementation, but we have lots of options, and of course we'll talk with anybody that has questions at a different time. And then here's our contact information. The public website, it has just a lot of information. You can sign up for a newsletter, again, kind of on a monthly basis. And then if you'd like to contact us, by all means, there's our toll-free number and our email address. And the very last page here, I think, is just to kind of show kind of the spread of our work since 2009. You'll notice the states in yellow is where we have a state presence, which means we've actually trained trainers in those states to provide Check and Connect training. So if you're listening from those states, you may or may not know that there are trained Check and Connect trainers in those states that can provide the training for you. And then, depending on where you live, we've been to several states many, many times. Other states, not so much, but the training has picked up, including international training also in South Africa, Australia, Canada, the Federated States of Micronesia also.
Joe, thank you so very much. Apologies for my alternating itchy trigger finger and the lag in this change of slides. I noticed that we have a couple questions from audience members, and just a reminder that we'll get to those at the very end. So thank you again, Joe. We're going to go ahead and pass the baton now to Rebecca Camejo. We're so excited to have you with us here today, Rebecca, and very aware that you are on your way to class shortly. So take it away.
Hi, okay, so I'm actually in a bathroom right now because there's a huge thunderstorm and there's no indoor places to sit, but without anybody hearing me. So if everybody can hear me okay. Okay, so my two mentors in high school were amazing. They were my English and math teachers, and I had them each for 3 years. They were more than just my mentors. They were my school moms. And they're the reason that I am a Schoolhouse Connection Scholar. They recommended the scholarship to me. I grew up in a very broken home for a long time. My mom is a recovering drug addict. My dad is a gambler to this day. And unfortunately, I was placed in transition, and I had to move out and live with my sister, who is not my legal guardian. My parents were very absent in my life, so I took it upon myself to do good in school for myself, but for a long period of time in high school, I was extremely critically, chronically depressed. And the only thing that really got me out of bed in the morning was feeling like I belonged at school. And so it was kind of like my escape from my home life. School became my home. And the only reason I can say that, it has nothing to do with taking calculus or any of those things, but it has everything to do with my teachers. And they helped me get into Project Upstart, which is an organization where they help you with a lot of things, like helping to take the metro to school. They help me get money for gas and things like that. There was a long period of time where I would come to school very hungry, having not eaten anything at home. I had come to school extremely tired from working long shifts because I also had to have a job because my parents had no money and refused to support me in like any school fees or anything like that. So they constantly fed me. They were very patient with me when it came to homework assignments. They reminded me what was important to me. It wasn't just about school and getting good grades. They maintained a healthy relationship with me so that I could know how to have healthy relationships with other people, because I didn't really grow up getting taught what boundaries are and things like that. I was both emotionally and physically abused. So I just was all over the place. And it's way easier for me to talk about it now just because it's been a long time. It's been about a year and a half since I've been living with my parents, but I had to live with my parents up until the age of 16. And so their names were Miss Hauser and Miss Keller. And Keller would open up to things about like her life and her childhood, and she would separate that time to just talk to me. Like there was never really any intervention with my family until I started living with my sister, which is both my sisters are a lot older than me. One is 28 and one is 30, and they're actually both pregnant now, so I get the opportunity to be a double aunt, and I'm very excited. But when I started living with my sister and she started realizing everything that was actually happening, I was still experiencing a lot of suicidal thoughts. So when I was able to really confront them head on, I didn't want to do it. I thought I could do it alone. And I actually ended up getting Baker Acted, which in the state of Florida, for those of you that don't know, means you get 72-hour suicide watch in a hospital. And that was a huge wake-up call for my family about like everything that was actually really going on. Everything felt really normal to me in the moment at living at home, but then I realized this is not normal. And so my sister intervened. So the biggest thing was also like my sister was in constant contact with my teachers and vice versa. So there was never really an opportunity for me to ever stray away from school. Like it was my home. It was where I built my foundation of faith in myself. And they were also my therapists. You know, I'd come crying about any little thing, and they would instantly just put life in a whole new perspective for me. And they gave me their numbers. I could call them whenever I could. My counselor was very adamant on making sure that I was safe every night. They would always come to my class in the morning, make sure I had eaten breakfast. They'd stay after school just to talk to me. And if I didn't go to their class, they would call me and then text me and ask me why didn't I come. And the fact that, I guess the most important thing for me was the fact that they prioritized my mental health and my safety and my well-being before my deadlines for school or any of that. I feel like when teachers act like real people and they get personal, it's so easy to change a kid's life. Like we all just need to remember, like we're human, things happen. And, you know, even though we come to school to learn, we don't just come to school to learn math and English. We come to school to learn values. And if I wasn't getting taught that at home, there was no way I was ever going to be the person that I am today. So the slide that talks about what makes a mentor, which is kind of what I just said, mentorship is guidance. That's the biggest thing. It's allowing somebody to feel safe enough for them to trust you and confide in you, not just for comfort, but for actual real life advice. And for a student experiencing homelessness, you have to make education personal. If it's not personal, then they're not going to be interested in what you have to say. And you have to essentially also behave as a reflection of what that child wants to be. Like, you need to uphold your character and the values that you have so that they can follow you and do the same thing. Designing any appropriate or helpful way to approach extremely emotionally charged issues. Things that kids tell you, it is very possible that you are going to feel very bad for them. And it's important that you can teach them how to handle that stress and anxiety or even depression. But in the education system, checking in and separating time for this individual is so important. Like obviously boundaries and appropriate setting, but stressing education as more of a freedom than anything is really essential for the students. So if you can't make it seem like education is mandatory, you have to make it seem like education is an opportunity. And this is like your opportunity. Like they would always stress, this is your way out. And so making goals with the student, I'd always have like little goals and then really big goals. And it was kind of like on a weekly basis that they did this with me. And just teaching them how to set boundaries in all of their relationships and, maintaining their physical health, ask them if they're exercising, if they're eating right, reminding them what matters when they don't know, reminding them that they matter and that they're important. And I don't know, just using what makes them different to give them opportunities. Like, a lot of people would tell me that I weave my story all the time in everything that I do, like I am super self-sacrificing, but nobody was self-sacrificing for me as a kid until I was like 16, 17 years old. And if you could just almost like have your values replicated in a student, then they're going to feel productive and essential, not just as a student, but as a person. I feel like everything flows from who you become and who you are. So if you don't have the values and you're not the person and you don't like who you are in the mirror, then it would be very hard for you to maintain your goals and have motivation to even just do school. And yeah, so, an environment is very important, an environment of not just learning, but creating, influencing, teaching them how to heal from wounds that are crazy, and just so that their hurting also doesn't affect others. Making them comfortable enough to grow and just feeling like you're reliable and they can come to you always. That's the most important thing when it comes to school resources, just knowing that there is somebody there that they can talk to, trust, and confide in. And patience. Please have patience with these children because they're not always thinking about schoolwork and they're not always thinking about deadlines. And it's important that you give them structure. That is something I never had as a kid. And now I give myself structure, and it's because I was taught how. So yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say. And if anyone has any questions about my walk in high school or just in general or about my family or my experience with homelessness or being in transition, I'm more than happy to answer any questions.
Rebecca, this is Katie again. I can't thank you enough for squeezing us in today, especially as Florida is undergoing storms and an impending hurricane, and you joined us from a bathroom. We couldn't be more grateful. Before you run off to class, I'd love for you to share with everybody, if you have an idea of what you're studying at the University of Miami and what brought you there and what you're excited about learning in this first year of school.
So I was actually between the University of Florida and the University of Miami, but the reason I came here is because I got a lot of scholarship money and I really wanted to stay. Family means everything to me, and the fact that my family is growing means a lot to me. So I wanted to stay to be a part of that, and also like my friends and everything. I just really decided to stay here, and I'm part of their mechanical engineering program. I don't know yet if I'm going to switch between departments, but I do plan on staying in the College of Engineering, and I plan on getting my master's, and then hopefully we'll see, but this is the goal, getting a PhD and getting my professional engineering license.
Well, we have no doubt that you will achieve everything that you set your mind to. And again, we're so grateful to have you with us today. And good luck racing to your next class. I know you're literally on the way. So thank you again to Rebecca. And I know that she means that everybody feel free to send questions directed to Rebecca through the questions pane, and I'll pass them along to her, and then she can determine at her discretion how she responds, if it's directly via email. Thanks again, Rebecca, and we're going to go ahead and segue now to Sarah Miller from Spokane, Washington. Thanks so much, Sarah.
Hi, thank you for having me, and I appreciate, gosh, Rebecca, I can't believe you did that from a bathroom. That's totally amazing. So I am the McKinney-Vento liaison for Spokane Public Schools, and we are located in eastern Washington State. We're like a mid to larger size district. We're the third largest in our state, but when I look at other districts across the nation, we're not that big. We have about 30,000 students that we support are district-wide each year. And in my last, I've been in this position, this will be my 11th school year, we tend to hover around 3.5% to 4% of our total student population is eligible for McKinney-Vento services. We have about 4,000 employees in our district and span an area of about 99 square miles. Within that, our program serves 34 elementary schools, 6 middle schools, 5 comprehensive high schools, 3 very specialized high schools, and 6 option schools. So our program staff serve all of that with our general McKinney-Vento services. I'm very fortunate to work in a district that has placed a really strong value on the services that McKinney-Vento requires, and our district does a lot to support the work that we do. We have 4 staff in our program that are dedicated to just this job. We don't share, we aren't doing other jobs. We're dedicated to McKinney-Vento. I am the liaison, and I'm 7 hours a day, 10 months. We have an intake specialist who is from the secretarial group, who is 8 hours a day. And then we have 2 McKinney-Vento specialists, 2 separate positions of 7 hours a day. Our program, just funding-wise, because that's always a very important question to address, and how can we even do this? We utilize some of our Title I homeless set-aside funds, our McKinney-Vento grant funds, and then our state, Washington State, has a homeless student stability program grant as well. We also, our transportation specialist, some of her, the cost for that position comes directly through our state funding process for transportation services as a coordinator. Excuse me, I'm so sorry. Our McKinney-Vento grant and the Homeless Student Stability Program grant, in those grant applications, we specifically refer to how our community specialists will be utilizing Check and Connect intervention for the students that we're serving. So, yay, next slide, please. Our program, just to kind of just really visually break down what our roles are and where we kind of lie within the district. Our intake and transportation specialist is just like it sounds. She's tethered to her desk and computer and does an amazing job with the logistics and coordinating that basic first level support for the families in our program. She keeps us running and keeps us in line when we kind of get out of it too. My job as the liaison, I am the one who's responsible for professional development. I do that both within district, our district employees and volunteers, but also the different things that we're doing out in the community, going to shelters, letting them know about our programs and all of those different things. I also belong on 3 different subcommittees for our continuum of care, so that our program remains very connected to the homeless services throughout our community, staying up to date on what's happening and really working collaboration amongst the different entities that serve families, students, individuals who are experiencing homelessness. I, as a liaison, am also the primary person going out to shelters on regular visits, meeting with new families, and making sure that they can connect to schools and get everything that they need. Our McKinney-Vento specialists there, they're the nitty-gritty of what we do. They, by design, are serving specific high schools, and which schools, number of hours we do in the needs assessment really determines where they're at and how they're supporting schools. They are our folks who are out there helping students, discover their dreams and set goals and make those goals a reality through just making school meaningful and really doing the work that gets our young people onto that next level. Next slide, please. I started developing this model of intervention. I am not a multi-tier system of support specialist. I was asked to create this document, which is over in the handout section, by our district folks to kind of give us that overall view of the support that we have. When we're looking at this, the liaison, my position, I am really working the tiers 1 through 3 and keeping all of that going, making sure that we have the notifications out at schools and the general work that we do, all the way up to my caseload of just, currently I have 3 students that I am the Check and Connect mentor for. Our intake and communication person, intake transportation really focuses on that tier 2 level for our McKinney-Vento, really focusing on the requirements of the McKinney-Vento law and the practices that we do to support all students who are in our program. And then our McKinney-Vento specialists are really looking at that tier 3, those kids in our McKinney-Vento program who are needing that extra level of support because they have an indicator or some risk of not finishing school or anything. This model of intervention is really a draft we keep modifying, so I want to put that caveat out there. Our Check and Connect is done primarily with our McKinney-Vento specialists. It's a work in progress for us, and while it's an amazing intervention that we do, we are always learning and modifying and figuring out ways to do it better. Our McKinney-Vento specialists have a total caseload at the schools that they're supporting of around 200 students. A majority of those, their services are really managed through our intake and transportation specialists, making sure those basic needs are met and they don't need a whole lot more for us. Their focus is on primarily unaccompanied youth, really focusing on those students who don't have that strong adult connection in their life. They focus their Check and Connect services on about 15 to 20 students from their total caseload. And the selection process for us right now for our program, the students are McKinney-Vento eligible. It's a specific referral from the school, or our student support teams can get them onto that Check and Connect caseload, or the students are in the top 10% of our absences, discipline incidences, and current Fs. We began implementing Check and Connect with these specialist positions in 2015-16 school year. Our program is really based around a lot of data. Again, our district has a huge support and is really interested in how our data looks, how we can access data and use it in really effective, meaningful ways. So they have developed our school-wide data tools. They do a lot of great things with Tableau behind that I can't see and don't really understand how they work that, but they come up with these beautiful reports that you see on the right-hand side. What you're looking at there is a high-risk report that we can pull up. This is one high school's McKinney-Vento population here that you're seeing. I can organize the data. I can sort it by their current Fs, their absences, or discipline incidences, and rank those students in order, and it'll reshuffle it for me. Visually, we can see that those students that have a lot of red are those students. Red indicates for us that student is at a really high risk for not continuing their education, and green would indicate that they're at a low risk. If you see in that discipline incidences, those are all zeros, and that color came out very poorly. When it's in real live view, that's a really faint pink color. So sorry that didn't come through very well there. Like I said, this data is it's real time. It is a 2-week snapshot, and we can look at this anytime for specific schools, specific kids, and really get down. I can select on a specific student from here and really delve into them. What assignments are they missing? What classes did they not make it to? So this is a really wonderful tool that our district has created for us to utilize. From our data field here, we absolutely pull out that information into our outcome form. This is also over in the handout section if you guys are interested in finding out more. And I will also note that our outcome form and where we find value and how we organize it seems to shift about every year. So this, again, is another document and process and a living, breathing thing. We use this outcome form for every high school student where our McKinney-Vento specialists are at. That top section on the left-hand side gets filled out all the way through outcome checks. So every student is we're looking at their BECA involvement, that's truancy, their periods that they're absent, discipline incidences, current Fs, and their credits 3 times a year at minimum. And that's every single student on that 200 student caseload gets this done. The students that we go into the Check and Connect portion move over onto that second sheet over there on the right-hand side. That we are checking our ABCs, utilizing that high-risk report from the previous slide and writing down that attendance, behavior, course completion, that check data that we're doing for the Check and Connect, and really writing that down in simplified forms. We really needed this one document for our program to really look at what's happening for all students in our program and to help us focus the work of Check and Connect and not have multiple documents that we're doing for our students. We use this form as a conversation starter for our connects. Our connects are really what it's all about. The data is great and it starts the relationship going, but really Check and Connect is really about that relationship that's going. Before a student is really willing to talk about the nitty and gritty of those checks, we really have to develop the relationship and prove ourselves to be dependable people, that we're open and honest in our communication, and that we believe in the students and we're really there. And once that relationship has been established, then we are able to use that document, our outcome form, our Check and Connect log, and use that data to start identifying gaps that students have for achieving their dreams, and really linking together, if their dream is this, but these are the kind of behaviors or the risks that we're seeing, how do we close those gaps? How do we get rid of those barriers that the student has? So the connects come in such different ways, and it's so individualized, and that's what we really like about the program, is how to link that data in with the connects and where do we go from there. So that's it. Our commitment when we are doing that Check and Connect intervention with those 15 to 20 students on each of the specialist caseload, and we tell them this right from the start, we will be meeting with you once a week, maybe more. What do you need? What does that look like for you? And helping the mentor and the student really establishing the frequency of that relationship. And that may change over the course of the school year. We let the students know that we're going to be looking at data and kind of teaching them what does that data mean, what does that look like, and why should it be important. Again, that conversation tends to happen later in the school year after that relationship is in effect and really trusted, but really looking at that data from the start is also helpful to why are we here, what are we doing. Our goal is to we remain with a student who is receiving Check and Connect for their duration in the program. So it would always end at the end of a school year. Sometimes that is just one school year that we're with them because they've moved into permanent housing and are no longer eligible under the grants and whatnot through McKinney-Vento. And we try to do a very warm handoff to somebody else. Some of those students come back and continue to work with us, but we are with them as long as they're in our program, maybe 5 years if they will allow us to be engaged. We really strive to engage a student in the process of school, of checking, of looking at their data, teaching them to find where those F's are at and why those F's exist. How can you log into your student information system and really identify where those at? So we really want the student to learn how to go through that process to check those things and learn how to advocate for themselves and to check that the data that the teacher has recorded is accurate and true. And we really want to go through and teach what that looks like. And then we're collaborating with outside parties. Back in the slides from Check and Connect, the breakdown of the 4 functions that we do each day, one of them is connecting to parents. Parents is a really broad term for us. It may mean a case manager at the shelter that they're staying with, or the family friend, adult family friend who's there. But we really commit to our students and let them know that we're collaborating with other people, those quote-unquote parents, the teachers in the school that they're working with, administrators, or other community members to help them achieve what goals that they have established for themselves and really help them move forward in that. We also, we do have barriers to providing that check and connect service, and that'll be on the next slide, please. Our biggest barrier that we have is not enough staff people. Our money only goes so far, and while we have 4 dedicated people for our McKinney-Vento students, that 4 certainly is not enough to provide the level of support that every student needs or deserves. And so we have to be really intentional about the services that we provide, to whom and when. Our next barriers are making sure that the students are engaged with us even when they're not in crisis anymore. A lot of times students are willing to talk with us and meet once a week or more when they're in crisis, but what happens when that crisis has resolved itself? Teaching students that that mentor, that relationship is there in crisis and out is our next biggest thing. I did want to mention our success, our big success as well, which is not on any slide here. I should have done this. But again, we're back to data for our biggest success. Our graduation rate, our 4-year adjusted cohort graduation rate in 2013, so prior to implementing Check and Connect, for our McKinney-Vento students was 68%. Since we implemented the Check and Connect program and had been providing it for a couple of years, our 4-year adjusted cohort graduation rate for 2017 jumped up to 76.3%. So about 8.3, I think, if I'm doing my math right, percentage points. And so that really goes to show that the Check and Connect, that intervention that we're providing and those relationships that we're doing are making an impact all the way to our graduation rate. Thank you. That's what I have.
Sarah, thank you so much. And thank you so much to Joe and to Rebecca. And we're already past time. This is helpful for me. It shows that in the future, if we focus on mentorship programming, that we have a lot of ground to cover and that we need to make sure we allot sufficient time. And I want to be mindful and respectful of everybody's time on the phone. So as I mentioned before, we will be certain to answer each and every one of your questions. What I will do is save all of the questions, distribute them to the presenters, and they can answer them in written form, and I will combine all of the Q&As in a clean document for distribution, and we can post that on our website so that everybody can benefit from learning the answers to everybody else's questions. So again, we really appreciate your flexibility. We wanted to make sure that we gave everybody sufficient time to cover their material today. We have a couple websites here for Schoolhouse Connection, the Education Leads Home campaign. The NCHE website, as many of you know, is very rich with materials. Obviously, Check and Connect, Attendance Works, there's a lot of work in this area, as well as the Everyone Graduate Center. And this slide here has email addresses for Sarah, Joe, and myself. And as I mentioned before, Rebecca said that she was more than happy to answer questions, but I'll let her determine at her discretion if she responds to people individually. And with that, we'll go ahead and close today, again, to be mindful of everybody's schedules, but we will be sure to turn around the answers to your questions ASAP. I'll be sending out the question list to our participants right after this webinar. Thank you so very much. Please feel free to reach out directly via email as well, and have a wonderful day. Thanks again to Sarah and Joe and to Rebecca, who's in her class right now. Have a great afternoon, everybody.